Man saves lion from a fire, but when they reach safety, what the lion does is incredible. The acrid smell of smoke had been drifting through the African savanna for hours, but Marcus Thompson barely noticed it anymore. After 15 years working as a wildlife conservationist in Kenya's Masai Mara, his senses had grown accustomed to the subtle signs of danger that most people would miss entirely. What he couldn't ignore, however, was the orange glow creeping across the horizon like a malevolent sunrise. Even though the sun had set hours ago, Marcus pressed his foot harder on the accelerator of his battered Land Rover, the engine groaning in protest as he navigated the rough terrain. His radio crackled with urgent communications from the Kenya Wildlife Service headquarters. The wildfire had started that morning near the Tanzanian border, sparked by lightning during an unusually dry season. What began as a small grass fire had exploded into an inferno that was now consuming thousands of acres of pristine wilderness. All units, this is base camp. The voice of Sarah Mitchell, the regional coordinator, came through the static. We're evacuating the southern sector. Repeat, immediate evacuation of all personnel from grid references 7 through 12. Marcus grabbed the radio handset, his knuckles white against the black plastic. Base camp, this is Thompson. I'm approaching Sector 9 now. Have you confirmed all the wildlife corridors are clear? Negative, Thompson. We lost contact with Ranger Station 9 about an hour ago. The fire jumped the river faster than our models predicted. You need to turn around now. Marcus stared at the wall of flame ahead, now close enough that he could feel the heat through his windshield. Somewhere in that inferno were creatures that had no understanding of evacuation orders or safety protocols, animals that had called this land home for generations, now trapped by a force of nature that showed no mercy. Thompson, do you copy? Return to base immediately. That's an order. He set down the radio without responding and continued driving toward the flames. The first sign of life he encountered was a family of warthogs racing past his vehicle, their usual aggressive confidence replaced by pure terror. Then came the zebras, their distinctive stripes blurring as they galloped in the opposite direction. Even the usually territorial buffalo were moving in the same direction, instinct overriding their normal behavior patterns. Marcus had witnessed animal migrations before, but never one driven by such desperate fear. The sight strengthened his resolve. If these animals could sense something he couldn't, he needed to trust their judgment and move faster. That's when he saw the small research station nestled between 2 acacia trees, its solar panels glinting in the firelight. The building appeared abandoned, but as Marcus approached, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The chain-link gate that should have been wide open during an evacuation was securely locked. Someone, in their haste to leave, had forgotten the most basic protocol. Marcus jumped out of his vehicle and ran toward the gate. The research station housed a temporary rehabilitation facility for injured wildlife, and if animals were still inside those enclosures. The padlock was newer than he expected, and his bolt cutters barely made a dent. Precious seconds ticked away as he struggled with the mechanism, sweat stinging his eyes as the temperature continued to rise. Behind him, he could hear the fire approaching, a sound like a freight train mixed with the roar of a waterfall. Finally, the lock gave way. Marcus threw open the gate and ran toward the enclosures, his heart sinking as he counted them. 12 individual pens, each designed to house different species during their recovery period. Most were empty, their gates hanging open where the evacuation had been successful. But in the furthest pen, partially hidden by smoke, he could see movement. The young lion was cowering in the corner of his enclosure, his golden coat matted with ash and debris. Marcus recognized him immediately. This was Jengo, a 6-month-old cub who had been brought in 3 weeks earlier after being found orphaned and malnourished. The rehabilitation team had been making incredible progress with him, but he was still too young and weak to survive in the wild. "Hey there, big guy," Marcus called softly, approaching the enclosure with careful, measured steps. Jengo's amber eyes tracked his movement, intelligent but filled with an ancient fear that transcended species barriers. Even a young lion understood when death was approaching. The lock on Jengo's enclosure was simpler than the main gate, but Marcus's hands were shaking now, whether from adrenaline or the increasingly intense heat, he couldn't tell. The fire was close enough now that he could see individual flames licking at the trees beyond the station. They had minutes, maybe less. The enclosure door swung open, but Jengo didn't move. Fear had frozen him in place, his natural instincts warring with the learned helplessness that sometimes developed in captive animals. Marcus knew he would have to make a choice that went against every protocol he'd ever learned about wildlife interaction. He stepped into the enclosure. If you're enjoying this incredible story of human courage and animal trust, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing wildlife rescue stories that will restore your faith in the bond between humans and nature. Easy, Jengo. We're going to get out of here together. Marcus's voice remained calm, even as the sound of approaching flames grew louder. He'd worked with big cats before, but never under these circumstances, and never with one so young that normal behavioral patterns might not apply. Jengo watched him approach, every muscle in his small body tense. When Marcus was within arm's reach, the cub did something unexpected. Instead of retreating further or showing aggression, he took a tentative step forward, as if recognizing something in Marcus's posture or scent that indicated safety rather than threat. "That's it, buddy. I know you're scared." "I know. I'm scared too." The moment Marcus's hands made contact with Jengo's fur, several things happened at once. The cub's body relaxed slightly, accepting the human contact with surprising trust. At the same time, a burning branch crashed down where Marcus had been standing just seconds before, sending up a shower of sparks that singed the hair on his arms. Without hesitation, Marcus scooped Jengo into his arms. The cub was heavier than he'd expected, probably 40 pounds of muscle and bone, but adrenaline gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. Jengo didn't struggle against the contact. Instead, he pressed closer to Marcus's chest, seeking the comfort of physical contact in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly unstable. The run back to the Land Rover felt like it took hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. Marcus could feel the heat intensifying with each step, and ash was falling like snow, coating everything in a grey blanket that made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Jengo's weight seemed to increase with each stride, but the cub remained perfectly still, as if he understood that any movement might jeopardize their escape. Marcus threw open the passenger door of his vehicle and gently placed Jengo on the seat, his hands moving quickly to secure the makeshift harness he kept in his emergency kit. The cub's eyes never left his face, and Marcus was struck by the intelligence he saw there. This wasn't just instinctual trust, but a conscious decision to place his life in human hands. The drive away from the fire was the most harrowing 20 minutes of Marcus's life. The flames had jumped the access road in 2 places, forcing him to navigate through sections where the fire was burning on both sides of the narrow track. His radiator temperature gauge climbed dangerously high, and twice he had to stop to clear burning debris from their path. Throughout it all, Jengo remained calm. More than calm, he seemed to understand exactly what was happening. When Marcus had to stop the vehicle to clear obstacles, the cub would place his paws on the dashboard and watch intently, as if standing guard. When the smoke became so thick that Marcus could barely see the road, Jengo would shift positions slightly, almost as if providing a comforting presence. They finally reached the evacuation zone just as Marcus's fuel gauge hit empty. The temporary command post had been set up in a clearing 5 miles from the fire line, and the sight of other rescue vehicles and emergency personnel was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen. Sarah Mitchell ran toward his vehicle as soon as she recognized it, her face a mixture of relief and exasperation. "To Marcus Thompson, you crazy son of a... What the hell were you thinking?" But her expression changed completely when she saw Jengo in the passenger seat. "You went back for one cub?" she asked, but there was no judgment in her voice, only amazement. "Udgi couldn't leave him," Marcus replied simply, as if it had been the most obvious decision in the world. The veterinary team was ready within minutes, but their preliminary examination revealed something surprising. Despite being trapped in a burning building and enduring a terrifying rescue, Jengo showed no signs of trauma or stress. His vital signs were normal, his breathing was steady, and he remained alert and responsive to his surroundings. Dr. Patricia Ochieng, the lead veterinarian, had worked with rescued wildlife for over 20 years, and she'd never seen anything quite like it. "Most animals that survive this kind of experience show immediate signs of shock or psychological trauma," she explained to Marcus as they watched Jengo explore his temporary enclosure. "But look at him. He's curious, engaged, showing normal behavioral patterns. It's as if the rescue experience actually strengthened him rather than traumatizing him." Marcus nodded, but privately he was thinking about something else entirely. During their escape from the fire, he had felt a connection with Jengo that went beyond the normal human-animal interaction he was accustomed to in his work. It was as if they had communicated on a level that transcended species barriers, each understanding exactly what the other needed to survive. The next few days passed in a blur of debriefings, paperwork, and media interviews. The story of the conservationist who risked his life to save a single lion cub had captured international attention, with news crews flying in from around the world to interview Marcus and film Jengo. But Marcus found himself growing increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. The narrative that was emerging in the media of a heroic human saving a helpless animal didn't match his memory of what had actually happened. During their escape, he hadn't felt like a rescuer so much as a partner in survival. Jengo hadn't been a passive victim, but an active participant in their mutual escape. It was on the 4th day after the rescue that Marcus finally understood what had really happened, and the realization changed everything he thought he knew about the relationship between humans and wildlife. He was visiting Jengo in the expanded enclosure that had been set up for him at the main research facility. The cub had grown visibly stronger over the past few days, his coat regaining its natural luster and his movements becoming more confident and playful. But when he saw Marcus approaching, something remarkable happened. Jengo approached the fence that separated them and sat directly in front of Marcus, making direct eye contact in a way that was unusual for even domesticated cats, let alone wild lions. Then, in a gesture that left Marcus speechless, the cub extended one paw through the fence links, not in a grasping motion, but palm up, in what could only be described as an offering. Dr. Ochieng, who had been observing nearby, gasped audibly. "In 30 years of working with big cats, I have never seen behavior like that. He's not asking for anything. He's giving. It's almost like he's saying thank you," Marcus finished, his voice barely above a whisper. But as Marcus reached out to gently touch Jengo's extended paw, he realized that the cub wasn't just expressing gratitude. The intelligence in those amber eyes conveyed something much more complex: recognition, respect, and what could only be described as friendship. Over the following weeks, as Jengo continued his recovery and preparation for eventual release, he and Marcus developed a relationship that defied every protocol and professional boundary that Marcus had maintained during his career. When Marcus visited, Jengo would immediately approach the fence, not in the eager, food-seeking manner typical of captive animals, but with the calm confidence of someone greeting an old friend. More remarkably, Jengo began displaying behaviors that suggested he was actively trying to communicate specific information to Marcus. If there was something wrong with his water supply, he would lead Marcus to that corner of his enclosure and wait until the problem was addressed. If other animals in nearby enclosures were showing signs of distress, Jengo would position himself where he could observe both the distressed animal and Marcus, seeming to alert him to problems he might otherwise miss. Dr. Ojieng documented these interactions meticulously, recognizing that they represented something unprecedented in her field. "We're witnessing the development of an interspecies communication system," she told Marcus one afternoon, as they watched Jengo demonstrate what appeared to be a specific gesture for "I'm thirsty" versus "I'm hungry." "He's not just smart," Marcus replied. "He's emotionally intelligent. During the fire, I felt like he was taking care of me as much as I was taking care of him." The comment sparked a conversation that would change Marcus's understanding of his own profession. As they talked, he began to realize that his most successful conservation efforts over the years had shared a common element. They had been collaborations rather than interventions. The animals he had helped most effectively were those with whom he had established mutual trust and communication, rather than those he had simply managed or controlled. "What if," Dr. Ochieng suggested, "we've been thinking about conservation backwards? What if the most effective approach isn't to save animals from their environment, but to partner with them to save the environment itself?" The idea was revolutionary, and over the following months, Marcus and his team began developing new protocols based on this philosophy. Instead of simply relocating animals away from human development, they began looking for ways to create shared spaces where both species could thrive. Instead of managing wildlife populations through control and containment, they began exploring communication systems that allowed for genuine cooperation. Jengo became the first participant in what they called the Partnership Protocol. As he grew stronger and more mature, instead of being released into a distant preserve, he was given access to increasingly large areas of the research facility's grounds, with the freedom to leave whenever he chose. The remarkable thing was that he chose to stay, not as a captive animal, but as what could only be described as a colleague. He would patrol the facility's perimeter, alerting staff to potential problems. He would interact peacefully with visiting researchers and conservation officials, seeming to understand that they were allies in maintaining the safety of the area. Most importantly, he would regularly venture into the surrounding wilderness and return with what appeared to be intelligence about the movements and needs of other wildlife in the region. 6 months after the fire, Marcus was preparing a presentation for an international conservation conference when he realized that everything he thought he had known about his profession had been wrong. He wasn't a wildlife conservationist, he was a translator, helping to facilitate communication between species that had more in common than either had previously realized. The presentation, titled Beyond Rescue, Interspecies, Partnership in Conservation, became one of the most influential papers in the field. But for Marcus, the theoretical implications were less important than the practical reality he experienced every day working alongside Jengo. 1 year after the fire, Marcus was leading a group of international visitors on a tour of the facility when Jengo did something that crystallized everything he had learned about the true nature of human-animal relationships. The group included several skeptical officials who questioned whether the partnership protocol was genuine interspecies cooperation or simply elaborate animal training. As Marcus was explaining the theoretical framework, Jengo approached the group and positioned himself directly next to Marcus, not in the submissive posture of a domesticated animal, but in the confident stance of an equal. Then, as the officials watched in amazement, Jengo turned his attention to a section of fence where none of the humans had noticed anything unusual. He approached the area, sniffed carefully, then returned to Marcus and executed a series of specific gestures that Marcus had learned to recognize as danger, small, and hidden. Following Jengo's lead, Marcus discovered a venomous snake that had become entangled in the fence wire, invisible to human observation but clearly detected by Jengo's superior senses. As Marcus carefully freed the snake and relocated it to a safer area, Jengo supervised the operation, positioned to intervene if anything went wrong. The officials left that day as converts to the partnership protocol, but Marcus was thinking about something even more significant. As he watched Jengo return to his evening patrol of the facility, he realized that the young lion had just demonstrated something profound about the nature of intelligence, consciousness, and moral responsibility. Jengo hadn't just detected a potential threat. He had made a conscious decision to communicate that information to the humans who could address it. More than that, he had done so in a way that prioritized the safety of all the creatures involved, including the snake that posed no direct threat to him. 2 years after the fire, Marcus published a follow-up paper titled Moral Agency in Non-Human Species, Evidence from Interspecies Partnership Programs. The paper documented dozens of instances where Jengo and other animals in the program had demonstrated what could only be described as ethical decision-making, prioritizing the welfare of others over their own immediate interests. But the most significant moment in Marcus's evolving understanding came on a quiet evening 3 years after the rescue. As he was finishing his daily notes in his office at the research facility, Jengo, now a magnificent adult lion weighing over 300 pounds, approached the office window as he did every evening. This had become their routine, a few minutes of quiet contact at the end of each day, a moment of mutual acknowledgement between partners who had shared an experience that changed both of their lives. On this particular evening, as Marcus looked into Jengo's eyes, he saw something that stopped him cold. The intelligence he had always recognized was still there, but now it was accompanied by something else: concern. Jengo was studying Marcus's face with the focused attention of someone trying to assess another's well-being. Marcus realized that he had been so focused on learning to understand Jengo that he had never fully appreciated that Jengo was simultaneously learning to understand him. The lion could read his moods, recognize signs of stress or fatigue, and was actively monitoring his welfare just as Marcus monitored Jengo's. The partnership protocol wasn't just about humans learning to communicate with animals. It was about two intelligent species learning to care for each other. As Marcus sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the implications of this realization, Jengo did something he had never done before. The lion rose up on his hind legs and placed his front paws against the window, positioning his face as close to Marcus's as the glass would allow. For a long moment, they remained like that, two beings from different species, locked in direct eye contact that conveyed more than any spoken language could have expressed. In Jengo's eyes, Marcus saw recognition, gratitude, respect, and something that could only be called love. But most remarkably, Marcus realized that Jengo saw the same things reflected back in his own eyes. The fire that had brought them together had been a moment of crisis that revealed a truth about the relationship between humans and wildlife that most people never discover. They weren't separate species competing for resources or coexisting in careful balance. They were potential partners, capable of genuine friendship, mutual support, and shared responsibility for the world they both called home. As the sun set over the African savanna, painting the sky in the same golden tones that had surrounded them during their escape from the flames 3 years earlier, Marcus understood that the most incredible thing about his rescue of Jengo wasn't that he had saved a lion's life. It was that in saving Jengo, he had discovered what it truly meant to be human, The young lion, who had once cowered in a burning enclosure, was now a confident adult who chose each day to remain in partnership with the human who had carried him to safety. But more than that, he was living proof that the barriers between species are far more permeable than anyone had previously imagined. The fire had ended within a week, leaving behind thousands of acres of burned savanna that would take years to fully recover. But from those ashes had emerged something unprecedented, a new model for human-wildlife relationships based on mutual respect, genuine communication, and shared purpose. Marcus often thought about that moment in the burning research station when he had made the decision to step into Jengo's enclosure. At the time, it had seemed like the desperate action of someone with no other choice. Now he understood that it had been the first step in a journey that would transform not just his own life, but the entire field of wildlife conservation. The man who had risked everything to save a lion cub had discovered that he hadn't been the rescuer at all. He had been the one being rescued, pulled back from a life of professional isolation into a partnership that revealed the true potential of interspecies cooperation. And every evening, as Jengo took his position at the office window for their daily moment of connection, Marcus was reminded that the most incredible rescues are the ones where both participants save each other.